The Chasm and the Collision by Robert Elessar. Copyright 2017 by Robert Elessar. All rights reserved. Any reproduction of this copyrighted material by any means without the express written consent of the author is strictly prohibited. For Jacob and Kira, all the way. Chapter 3. The Waves in the Wall. That evening, Alex's father came home later than he had the previous night, and Alex had already gone to his room to finish his assignments and try to clear his head. He'd had trouble concentrating all afternoon, so he hadn't made progress as quickly as usual, and that frustration added to his already pensive mood. He thought he saw his mother give him a concerned glance more than once that evening, but she made no comment. He wasn't sure whether to be happy or disappointed about her discretion. Part of him wanted to blurt out the whole mess, dinosaur tales and all, in hopes that she, being a grown-up, would know what it all meant. He was old enough and realistic enough, though, to realize that this sort of thing would probably confuse both of his parents at least as much as it did him. Adults could be the worst people with whom to discuss something truly fantastic. So it was with a somewhat heavy heart that he forced his way through the remnant of his class assignments and got ready for bed. After brushing his teeth and putting on his pajamas, he went back to his room and again lay on his mattress, trying to calm his mind. He considered reading a bit, but quickly dismissed the idea, knowing that he wouldn't be able to concentrate enough to enjoy it. When he heard his father arrive, he decided not to get up and greet him. Since he'd already decided that his parents wouldn't be able to decipher the issues that troubled him, welcoming his father home would only leave Alex frustrated. He flopped over onto his side, facing the wall opposite his bedroom door. He had left his curtains closed since the previous night and was glad that he'd done so. If they were open, he would have worried that, at any moment, he might once again see the bizarre, square-winged manta shape soaring across the sky. Or worse, he might find a horrible, fanged reptilian face drooling and looking in at him with beady, hungry eyes. A T-Rex out of its time and ravenous enough to see if it could get its head through the window to munch on a 12-year-old boy. Those thoughts prompted Alex to turn over on his other side and face the door. It was a far more comfortable view than the window, even with the curtains drawn. He must have finally begun to drowse despite his worries, because when his mother popped her head in to shut off the light and say good-night to him, he started back into incomplete wakefulness. "What?" he mumbled. Sorry, his mother whispered from the doorway as she flipped the wall switch, throwing the room into deep shadow. "Go back to sleep, sweetie. Good night." "Good night," Alex murmured as his mother softly and incompletely closed the door behind her, and he drifted back into a deeper slumber. A measureless interval later, Alex found himself walking along a grand, arched hallway, simply and beautifully carved through red-brown rock, tiled on the floor with gray, rough-textured stone in large squares. The passage was well lit. At regular intervals along both sides of the hallway, shielded knobs of stone protruded from the walls, without seam or gap, apparently carved at the same time the hallway had been created. The ends of these knobs glowed with a perfectly white, cool radiance, not so bright as to discourage a direct gaze. They didn't look like any kind of light bulb that Alex had seen before. Alex's curiosity about the lights on the walls was superseded when he noticed a different kind of light up ahead. The new light was subdued and had a reddish-orange tint, as though he were facing west at the waning of the day. He soon saw that the light came from the end of the hall ahead, where the arched ceiling gave way to open sky. Exiting the hall, Alex found himself standing in what looked to be a large garden. The surface beneath his feet stayed the same, but it spread out wide, both ahead and to the sides, forming walkways and paths of varying sizes, coursing through what seemed to be a spacious botanical park. Alex didn't recognize any of the plants, but they were not terribly strange either. There were many kinds of flowers, of brilliant and diverse colors, some growing on individual stalks like dandelions, some grouped together, some gracing bushes and vines of various shapes and sizes. The leaves of all the plants, bushes, shrubs, trees, and even grasses, were green but with a slight bluish tinge. The smell of combined greenery was refreshing and delightful, a mix of floral scents more enticing than any Alex could recall having smelled before, with clean, leafy aromas and sharp, resinous, evergreen odors. None of them was quite familiar, but they all seemed perfect and natural and were invigorating. Alex would have been delighted to explore this garden and to see every variety of vegetation in it, but he had a purpose here, and he could not delay just to indulge in wonder and curiosity. He wasn't sure how he knew he had a purpose, but he wanted to move forward, to walk along the main flagstoned path to what he knew was the center of the garden. He made his way for quite some distance, enjoying the scents and sights around him, but not slackening his pace, knowing that there was some urgency. He had to meet someone, or something. In fact, he only realized at that moment that he was being called, drawn to that meeting. The call was not verbal, and he had no idea how he had become aware of it, but he knew that it was the reason for his presence in the garden. As he walked, Alex came in sight of a raised platform ahead, as though he were approaching some type of altar. The stone rose in concentric circles, the largest and lowest of which must easily have been 100 feet across, then shrinking with each successive level. Alex approached and walked up the stone risers until he reached a level just higher than his head had been. The topmost tier formed a wide plaza, the center of which was not stone, but was cultivated soil like the rest of the garden. It formed a grassy circle about 30 feet from side to side, penetrated by a radial path in front of Alex. That path led to a small tree, or perhaps a very large bush, that held the central position in the garden, growing in a smaller circle of grass surrounded by the inner path. Out of the tree's trunk, which was perhaps a foot thick, grew 3 branches, evenly spaced, one near Alex and 2 on the side opposite him. More branches split in 3s from these original ones at regular intervals. The tree's leaves were ovoid, dark, and with a sheen that was reminiscent of poison ivy, though Alex somehow doubted that touching these would be harmful. When he came close to the tree, Alex felt a sense of warmth and welcome. He knew that this was what had called him. He smiled in greeting, and though nothing in the tree moved, he felt that he was being greeted in return. He thought he heard footsteps behind him, and he turned to see who might be coming along, more curious than alarmed. Then he woke up. He was extremely disoriented for several seconds, not realizing at all where he was. Why was he lying down when an instant before he had been standing? Why was it suddenly dark when he knew the sky should be glowing with rust-tinted ruddiness? More importantly, where was the tree? The tree had called to him. He needed to speak to it. He had gone such a long way to meet it, and now he was someplace else, and he didn't know how he had gotten there. Sitting up and looking around, it took him a surprisingly long time to realize that he was in his own bedroom and that he had been dreaming. As full consciousness returned, he began to make connections between the dream from which he had just awakened and the more startling one the night before. The sky in the garden had, he concluded, been the same sky which had loomed above the cliff and the impossible stone building city toward which he had flown the previous night. The colors of the plants in the botanical garden had also been reminiscent of those over which he had passed in the wild, rocky ground of the earlier dream. He wondered if there was something else connecting the dreams. He thought there was, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. His concentration, poor as it was, since he had only just awakened, was further interrupted when he heard a thump from downstairs. This was followed by a muttering voice, one that might have been his mother's, but was certainly not deep enough to be that of his father, who was occasionally plagued by bouts of insomnia. He wondered for an instant why he could hear the sound so well, but then he realized that his mother hadn't completely closed his bedroom door after shutting off the light and wishing him good night. She sometimes did that if Alex was already asleep, or nearly so, apparently worried that the extra noise of closing the latch would disturb him. Now, it seemed, she was the one whose sleep was disturbed. Alex wondered if the noise of her moving about might have been what had interrupted his dream. Deciding that he would say hello and keep his mother company since he was awake as well, Alex got out of bed, rubbed his eyes, and walked to his bedroom door. As he went into the hallway, he noted that his parents' door was closed. He could hear his father's moderate but distinctive snore coming from behind it. His mother had apparently not been worried about the sound of the door disturbing her husband's sleep, and Alex could understand why. If the sound of his own snores didn't awaken him, the little click of an engaging door latch was certainly not going to penetrate his slumber. Alex smiled to himself as he walked down the stairs, his sock-clad feet almost silent as they padded along the carpeted surface. He was nearly at the bottom when he realized to his puzzlement that no light seemed to be on. Thankfully, his eyes were well adjusted to the darkness. He could see reasonably well in the ambient illumination that trickled in from the street lamps outside. As he reached the bottom step, already beginning the turn that would face him toward the rear of the house, he heard another thud, followed by a bit of shuffling, then some muttered words that he couldn't make out, but which carried the tone of curses, such as one might spew if one had just had a painful close encounter with a hard piece of furniture. The noises and the voice came from the left rear of the house. Was that his mother's voice? It didn't sound quite like her, really, but it definitely wasn't his father. If it was his mother, why hadn't she turned on the light so she could avoid hurting herself? She hated moving around in the dark. Alex stopped in mid-step and called out, "Mom?" The sounds of movement abruptly ceased. Then seconds later, Alex heard a quick, scrambling rush of noise, then a soft sound like fluttering fabric, then silence. He was still sleepy and befuddled, or he probably would have understood the situation at least a bit better and not been so reckless, but he was too curious and puzzled to consider any possible danger. Completing his step off the end of the stairs, he moved to his right, through the archway into the family room, then turned to face the dining room, from whence he concluded the noises had arisen. "Mom?" he said again. There was no sign of his mother, nor was there anyone else. There was, however, movement. The left-hand dining room curtain was waving back and forth just slightly, as if it had recently been disturbed and was still in the process of settling back to a resting state. Like those on the front windows, the dining room curtains were open. Alex's mother left them that way most of the time, even at night, to engender an open, spacious feeling. Alex had inherited and embraced the practice, except for the last 1.5 nights. He walked into the dining room, still feeling no fear, still expecting somehow to see his mother as he entered the room. He saw no one, and the curtain was now still. Walking around the table, he approached the hanging cloth, some thought of connection nagging at the back of his mind, but refusing to make itself clear through the fuzziness of his recently disturbed sleep. He was still not afraid. It didn't even occur to him that there might be a reason for fear. Just curious and bemused. What had set the curtain in motion? Even if the heat or air conditioning had been on, which they were not, there was no vent close enough to disturb the material. Alex reached out, pulling the drape forward into the side, trying to see if the fabric had gotten bunched up somewhere. He had no idea what he was expecting to find, but as he moved the curtain away from the wall, what he did see was not merely unexpected, but unbelievable. The movement of the drape sent very slight ripples and distortions through the wall behind it, as though it too were made of fabric, a lighter weave than that which Alex held. Or rather, the wall behaved like the surface of a very still pool that had been disturbed by a breeze, sending tiny waves across its surface, which quickly died out as the breeze stopped. Of course, those ripples were on a surface perpendicular to the ground, a surface that was supposed to be solid. Also, the waves hadn't stopped at the boundary between the wall and the window, but had carried on a little way past the frame and even to the glass itself, causing peculiar refractions in the dim light from outside. The view of the backyard wobbled momentarily within that small crescent-shaped area. Alex stared at the wall and window edge. His brain was still foggy, and he was not at all sure that he had really seen what he thought he had seen. Now that the rippling had stopped, the wall and window looked completely normal, as solid as the rest of the house. But of course, they had to be solid. They were sheetrock, wood, glass, and metal, not liquid or gelatin or even cloth as they had seemed to be for a moment. Shaking his head, trying to organize his thoughts and to concentrate, Alex reached slowly forward to touch the wall behind the curtain. He half expected to feel the normal, hard surface covered with smooth paint. The other half of him anticipated the wall pushing back like a rubber sheet, or for his hand to feel a wet, cool sensation like a puddle of water. None of these happened. Instead, his fingers passed through the wall as if it did not exist, disappearing into it as though it were an illusion. He only went as far as his first set of knuckles before quickly drawing back, startled and just beginning to be afraid. The movement of air created by the abrupt withdrawal of his fingers initiated a much more subdued rippling in the wall's surface than the movement of the curtain had. His hand, it seemed, not to disturb the wall at all, despite having gone almost an inch into or through it. It was as though either his hand or the wall, or both, were insubstantial. He had felt nothing, had encountered no resistance stronger than air when his fingertips disappeared. He reached out to touch the wall again, this time intending to put his entire hand into it if he could, but he was interrupted by the sound of his mother's voice coming from upstairs. "Alex," she called in a strange hybrid of whisper and yell. From the direction of her voice, Alex guessed that she was standing at the top of the stairs. He hadn't heard her door open, but she must have heard him calling her name and come out to see what was the matter. He was almost certain that he had left his own door widely ajar, so she could easily see that he wasn't in his room. "I'm down here, Mom," he said over his shoulder, still staring at the wall, holding the curtain away, but not yet touching its surface again. He heard his mother's footsteps coming down the stairs, and he immediately let go of the curtain, allowing it to fall back into place before she could reach the bottom and come into the family room. He wondered if, behind the curtain, the wall was now rippling and distorting, or even splashing. He couldn't see, and he certainly could hear nothing from it. He turned around just as his mother entered the family room. Her hair was a bit of a mess, and she looked as bleary and confused as Alex felt. "What are you doing?" she asked as she walked toward him, moving with great care in the dark room. Alex looked around. He couldn't tell his mother what he had just seen happening to the wall behind the curtain. She wasn't likely to accept it, and he was almost more frightened of what would happen if she did. If she were to believe his report, or at least if she believed that he believed it, she would probably check the wall herself. What if she too found that its surface was both fluid and insubstantial? There would no doubt be a tremendous commotion. Alex didn't know why, but for the moment at least he wanted to avoid any uproar, or indeed any attempt to confirm or explain the phenomenon he had just witnessed. It seemed somehow both secret and important. He felt not the slightest trace of fear about it now. In the back of his mind he wondered, as he had when he had seen the flying manta ray the night before, if he had not still been dreaming in some way when he had come downstairs. He certainly felt groggy, far more so than when he had awakened the night before. This time he had wanted to stay asleep, to keep dreaming. In fact, he felt that the dream itself had tried to keep him asleep. Yet he didn't truly believe that he'd imagined the rippling wall and window, any more than he thought that he'd imagined the flying creature, or the reptilian tail behind the school wall. In the face of Alex's continued silence, his mother repeated, "What are you doing, Alex?" She had come to a halt, standing to one side of the dining room table. Alex shook his head, saying, "What?" "Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought I heard you down here." "I beg your pardon?" his mother asked, eyeing him quizzically. Alex, recognizing how fuzzy-headed he was, wanted to say as little as possible to avoid revealing anything that would alarm his mother. He tried to keep things simple, saying, "Yeah, I thought I heard you talking and moving down here, so I came down to see what was going on." His mother took a step forward and looked at him more closely, apparently trying to get a clearer look at him. He knew that she couldn't see very well in dim light, and he wondered why she didn't just flip on the overhead lamp above the dining room table. She seemed satisfied with whatever she discerned from his countenance, however. Her face and shoulders visibly relaxed, and she said, "I think you must have been dreaming. You barely look awake now." Alex was sure of that. His eyes were still gummy and blurred, his head was cottony, and half his mind was still in the garden of his dream, despite the uncanny phenomenon he had seen in the dining room wall and the noise that had preceded it. "I guess," he murmured. "Come on," his mother said, coming close and taking him gently by the shoulder. "Let's get you back up to bed." Alex allowed himself to be guided to and then up the stairs, his mother right behind him. When they reached the top, she watched as he went into his room and crawled under the covers. "You all set?" she asked from the doorway, her voice gentle and unconcerned. "Yeah, Mom," he replied. "I'm good." "All right," she said. "Go back to sleep, sweetie. Good night." "Good night," he replied. His mother closed the door all the way this time, but Alex didn't immediately return to slumber, though a large part of him wanted to recapture the dream of the garden. More urgently, though, he wanted to think, as well as he was able, about what had just happened downstairs. He really didn't believe he had been dreaming when he had seen the curtain move and the wall ripple. As far as he could tell, the drywall and the window edge really had acted as though they were somehow liquid, even though, to all outward appearances, they were as solid as the rest of the house. It had been dark, true, but not all that dark. He didn't think it had just been a trick of light and shadow. And then there was the fact that his hand had gone into the wall, at least as far as the ends of his fingers, without feeling a thing or causing any disturbance, unlike the motion of the curtain. Why was that? Also, just what or who had made the noise that had drawn him downstairs in the first place? He suspected that it was what had disturbed his dream, and he was mildly angry at whoever it was for interrupting him. He had liked that dream. He had liked that tree. He wanted to go back downstairs to look at the wall some more and to see if there was any sign of someone else having been in the dining room. Unfortunately, his mother was almost certainly still awake and listening to make sure that he was okay. He wouldn't be surprised if she had left her door open so she could better hear and see any further nighttime wanderings. He would have to wait a while before going back downstairs, at least until he could be fairly sure that his mother was asleep. While he waited, he thought about the things that had happened lately. They had to be related. How could they not be? Both nights his dreams had been interrupted or followed by strange noises, and in his own case at least, by even stranger sights. The timing of the events matched up, and Simon's point about the unlikeliness of it being coincidence was convincing. That same argument made him think that the tale he had seen in the yard near the school must also be related, even though it hadn't coincided with the dreams, and neither Simon nor Megan had seen it. But how did it all connect? What connected it? The dream, he thought groggily. The dream had come first, for him as well as for Simon. The dream had preceded the noise. And Megan had only had the dream. She had been too far away to hear the noise, or maybe she had just gone to sleep before she could hear it. The dream. That was the thing they all shared. The dream, which meant sleeping. You had to sleep to dream. Alex drifted off while thinking his disjointed thoughts. He didn't, as far as he could recall later, have any more dreams about anything that night. He also heard no more nightly noises, but slept soundly and peacefully until his alarm clock awakened him. When he returned to consciousness, he was instantly angry with himself. He had allowed himself to fall back to sleep when he had meant to go downstairs and explore the phenomenon behind the dining room curtains. Now he had lost the opportunity, and he was almost certain not to get another chance before school. His parents were in and out of the dining room throughout most workday mornings. He would have no private time to examine the wall, and he didn't want to poke around behind the curtains while his mother and father were nearby. When he went down for breakfast after he'd washed and dressed, Alex saw that his expectations were correct. His mother was puttering around between the kitchen, the dining room, and the family room. His father was seated at the dining room table, eating a singularly unappetizing bowl of cereal while looking at his laptop. There was no privacy possible in the dining room that morning. Alex was rather taciturn as he made himself toast and poured a glass of milk for his breakfast, and he ate in silence also. His mother asked him if he'd slept all right for the remainder of the night, and he truthfully and regretfully told her that he had. Soon he gathered his things and headed off to school, saying goodbye to his parents, who were at the time also preparing to leave. He grumbled to himself as he walked, looking mostly down at the pavement, deeply disappointed in his inability to stay awake despite the remarkable mystery he had discovered. When he reached homeroom, Simon wasn't there yet, but he arrived only minutes later, still well before his usual time. Alex regarded his friend thoughtfully, undecided about whether or not to discuss his uncanny finding on the dining room wall. Simon distracted Alex completely before he could make up his mind. "So," he said, as he plopped his book bag on the table and took his usual seat, "did you enjoy the botanical gardens last night?" Alex stared at Simon for a moment before attempting a response. Wait, he finally began. Wait, do you mean the dream, Simon said, completing Alex's sentence. You know, the one where you came out of that big hallway and were in that big outdoor park and walked up that dais or whatever they call it to where that tree was? Alex continued to stare for another lengthy interval. He had not given much thought to his dream, having been powerfully distracted by the events in the dining room. Now, however, his thought processes were derailed and then reoriented in one jarring shift. Do you mean, he asked, you had the same dream? Well, I doubt if it was exactly the same, Simon said with a tiny shrug and a thoughtful expression, but I bet it was pretty nearly the same. I was sure that you must have had it. Alex got the idea that Simon meant more by that statement than simply that he had presumed, by extension, that because they had shared a dream the night before last, that this one had been shared too. Why do you say that? He asked. Simon raised an eyebrow and replied, Because I saw you there. For the third time that morning, Alex stared dumbly at his friend. At last he forced himself to ask, Say what? I saw you there, Simon said again with a chuckle. He seemed much more comfortable and assured than he had been the day before, when the coincidence of dreams between himself, Alex, and Megan had first been brought to his attention. Alex suspected that Simon, at least, had given some serious thought to the matter, and knowing the usually very effective power of Simon's mind, it had probably brought him a long way. What do you mean you saw me? He asked. Tell me what happened. Well, Simon began, I was walking down this big hallway, and it came out into a kind of park or something. It was pretty nice. There were all sorts of plants and flowers there. They weren't quite normal plants. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen any of them before. But they were nice, and the place smelled great. He paused for a moment, then asked, Were you able to smell it? Alex nodded. That's weird, isn't it? Simon said. I don't remember ever being able to smell anything in a dream before. I guess that's a good thing, though, because I've had some dreams that have smelled pretty bad. Like this one time I dreamed I was in this bathroom at this gas station. Anyway, Alex interrupted with a bit of heat, you were telling me about your dream from last night. Right, sorry, Simon said, and then went on. Well, I really wanted to wander around and check out some of the plants and things, but I felt like I had to get somewhere, like there was something important I had to do or someone important I had to meet, you know? Yeah, Alex replied fervently, amazed to hear his own impression so accurately conveyed. I do know. Simon nodded, clearly not surprised. Anyway, he said, I walked down the center path and came to that dais thing. Dais? Alex interrupted, not recognizing the word. Uh-huh, Simon said. I think that's the word for one of those raised platform altar kind of things. Did I get it wrong? How the heck should I know? Alex retorted. I just asked you what the word was because I didn't know what you meant. Oh. Well, do you know now? I think so, Alex said, guessing that Simon was referring to the large, circular, tiered central area of the garden with the small tree in the middle. Cool, Simon said with a nod. Then he continued, Well, I walked up those stairs, or whatever you call them, and at the top, down at the end of the path, I saw you standing in front of that tree, looking at it. You were wearing your pajamas. Really? Alex asked. He hadn't paid any attention to his clothes in the dream. It seemed odd to him that Simon, or anyone, would dream of another person in their sleepwear, especially if he always saw that person during the daytime. But of course, this had hardly been a normal dream. Yeah, Simon replied. It made me look down to see what I was wearing, and sure enough, it was the shorts and t-shirt I wore to bed. Weird, huh? Alex nodded. Yeah, it is, he admitted. So what happened next? Well, Simon told him, I started walking toward you. I felt like coming to that tree and maybe to you was the thing that was so important, so I tried to go up and say, hi, but then you turned your head. I heard you, Alex exclaimed, drawing a startled sound from one of the other students in the room. He and Simon had been speaking in undertones up to that point. Alex glanced at the girl who had heard him and saw her glance back at him and then looked back down at the textbook she was reading. Satisfied that she wasn't listening, he went on more quietly. I was standing there, kind of saying hello to that tree, and I heard someone... You were what? Simon interrupted. Huh? Alex said. You said you were saying hello to the tree? Well, kinda, Alex said, feeling embarrassed, though he wasn't quite sure why. I mean, I felt like the tree was the reason I was there or something. You know how you said you felt like you had something important to do, and maybe it was to go up to the tree? Simon nodded. Well, I felt the same way, Alex said. And once I got to the tree, I knew that was it. It was I could feel it sort of talking to me. And not exactly, but I could tell it was happy to see me, and I was happy to see it, too, you know? Simon shook his head. Not really, he admitted. Alex shrugged, still embarrassed. Maybe you weren't close enough yet, I don't know. But anyway, I heard someone coming up behind me. I thought it was more than one person, but I guess it was just you. I guess so, Simon agreed. You probably did hear more than one person because I heard someone coming up just behind me for a second. But then, just when you were turning to look over your shoulder, I woke up. Alex was silent for a moment, too amazed to be frightened by the seemingly impossible, repeated sharing of dreams. That's exactly when I woke up, he finally said. Yeah, I figured that, Simon said with a nod. Really? Alex said. Sure, Simon replied. I've been thinking about it, and it feels like... Well, yesterday we were all kind of saying we all had dreams that were just like the ones the others had. Yeah, Alex said, and now you and I had the same dream again. He was astonished that Simon was talking so calmly about the subject, especially since he'd been so flustered and upset the day before. Not just you and me, Simon countered. Remember, you heard more than one person behind you, and I heard someone behind me. I mean, I didn't look, but you know who the other person had to be, right? Alex was silent for a moment before stating the obvious. Megan, he said. Of course, Simon said. It's gotta be. She had the same dream we had yesterday. Well, the night before last now, I guess. And I'll bet she had the same dream we had last night, too. And I'll bet she woke up at the exact same time, just like the night before when that sound came. Wait, Alex interrupted. We didn't all wake up at the same time. I started flying down and it almost hit the ground when I woke up, but you guys didn't. Simon shook his head. No, he said, I've been thinking about it. In that first dream, we were floating, or flying, or whatever. The last night we were just walking, but both times you were up ahead. I think we were just going so fast the first time that we were too far away to see each other, but we still woke up at the same time. I think I was a little bit behind you both times, and Megan was a little behind me. But how? Alex asked. How can we not just have the same dreams, but wake up from them at the same time? Because, Simon answered, his eyes bright and excited, we weren't just dreaming about the same thing. We were having the same dream. We all shared a dream. Alex was confused. It sounded like Simon was just saying the same thing in a different way, but it was clear that he meant something specific and wanted Alex to understand. Simon, it seemed, could tell that Alex didn't quite get his point, because he gave a brief shake of his head and said, What I mean is, we weren't just dreaming about the same thing at the same time. That's just too unlikely. We were connected and literally having the same dream, like telepathy or something. Not seeing a big difference between what Simon was saying now and what they'd already discussed, Alex shrugged and asked, Okay, we had the same dream telepathically or whatever. But why and how? Simon smiled broadly, which surprised Alex much more than bringing up the idea of telepathy, and he said, I don't really know how or why, but I think I might have an idea of a sort of a cause. Alex was caught off guard and certainly intrigued. What? He asked. The fruit. Alex watched Simon for several seconds, waiting for him to go on. When Simon just sat there with an excited and almost smug look on his face, as if he had given Alex an answer that was not only brilliant but entirely clear, Alex asked, What fruit? Simon shook his head in exasperation. The fruit, he said. The berries. The ones we all ate. You, me, and Megan. We all ate that fruit, and that night we all had the same dream. It's the only thing that makes sense. Does it? Alex asked, now recognizing to what fruit his friend was referring, but not understanding at all how and why he had made his deduction. Of course, Simon said. Look, we're all definitely having the same dreams, or at least we did yesterday for sure. We know that. None of us could have been lying or tricking each other or figuring out each other's dreams any other way. And I'll bet if you ask her in second period, Megan's going to say she had the exact same dream we had last night, too. But look, You and me, we hang out together all the time. It's not all that crazy that we might dream about the same thing sometimes. But why would Megan be dreaming about the same thing as the two of us? Well, Alex suggested, I mean, you guys have known each other for a long time, and, well, I like her. You like her, Simon said, so you might have dreams about her. And I don't even really want to know what kind of dreams. But that wouldn't make her have the same dream as us. And it wouldn't make us share dreams, that's for sure. The only connection is those berries. Wait a minute, Alex said. I kind of see what you're saying, but how could berries make us have the same dream? They're just berries. Ah, Simon said, but they weren't normal berries, were they? I mean, none of us knew what they were, right? And they tasted great, but we've never seen or tasted anything like them before, right? Do you even know where your mom got them? I don't know, Alex replied with a shrug. I figure the supermarket. Maybe, Simon said, but maybe not. We should ask her. Because what if they're not normal fruit? What if they're like GM fruit or something? Now Alex was totally lost. GM fruit, he asked? You mean like the car company? No, Simon replied, laughing. Not GM, General Motors. I mean GM, genetically modified. You know, genetically engineered fruit. They do that with corn and stuff, like, to make it resistant to bugs and things. They do? Alex asked, still rather lost. Sure, Simon confirmed. They do it all the time now, even though there's people who freak out about it and say no one knows what the effects might be. I always thought that sounded kind of stupid. I mean, what could the effects be, right? But what if it's not stupid? What if somebody took a strawberry or something and genetically engineered it to be the sweetest, best-smelling, best-tasting fruit ever? They'd make a lot of money, right? I guess so, Alex said, more because Simon clearly expected him to agree than because he was keeping up. Right, Simon said with a nod, as though Alex had made an original point. But what if they didn't just make the fruit really taste great? I mean, whatever they did to the fruit, you know, the genetic engineering stuff, what if it made some people who ate it get, like, telepathically connected and have shared dreams and stuff? Alex, feeling very much over his head, said, But how could fruit do that? I mean, even if it was like radioactive fruit, it wouldn't make somebody telepathic. Who knows what it might do or how? Simon asked, still excited. There are all sorts of things people don't understand about stuff like that. But it's a fact that we all had some of that fruit, and then, that same night, we all three had the same dream. It's the only thing we've got in common, apart from going to the same school and everything, but if it was that, there'd be a lot more people having the same dream. Alex said, Maybe there are. Simon looked at him disparagingly for a moment before saying, Come on, do you really think that? Well, no, Alex admitted, but we don't even know that Megan had the same dream last night. I'll bet anything she did, Simon told him. But it's easy to find out. Just ask her when you get to second period, if she doesn't ask you before you even get the chance. Alex was beginning to be persuaded, though he felt there was something missing from Simon's argument. It was close, he thought, but not quite correct. Okay, he said. So let's say you're right about the berries and dreams being connected. What about the noise, that flying thing? That doesn't seem like anything that could have anything to do with fruit. It was now Simon's turn to look at Alex for a long moment without speaking. He didn't look puzzled or confused, but he seemed distinctly displeased, as though Alex had brought up something he didn't want to consider. Finally, Simon admitted, I don't know how it would explain the noise, or that thing you thought you saw. I did see it, Alex shot back. Yeah, Simon allowed. Then his face brightened a bit, and he said, Well, if the berries could make us have telepathically connected dreams, maybe they could make us hallucinate, too, and have the same hallucination. Huh, Alex grunted. I guess that might make sense. He had been wondering quite often whether he'd been imagining things over the past few days, and he found the idea of hallucinations induced by mutant berries far more comforting than the notion that he was simply seeing things that weren't there for no clear reason. Simon, however, still looked troubled. Yeah, he said, maybe. But it's not like we all had exactly the same one. You're the only one who saw it, and Megan didn't see or hear it. It seems different somehow. I feel like if it's a telepathic hallucination, it's a really realistic one. Alex raised his eyebrows. Realistic, he asked. It's not very realistic. I mean, there's no such thing as a flying manta ray, right? Simon shook his head. That's not what I mean, he said. It just seems like, well, you heard and saw the thing because it went right over your house. I heard it but didn't see it because my house is kind of close to yours, and Megan didn't hear it at all because she lives further away, and maybe her house has, I don't know, thicker insulation or something. Alex, lost again, said, Yeah, so? Well, Simon said, if it was a hallucination that we all had telepathically, or well, at least that you and I both had, why did we both hallucinate it going over your house? Why didn't we all three see and hear it going over our own houses? Alex shrugged helplessly. I don't know, he confessed. It's all over my head. He gave a quick smile, hoping Simon would catch his meager joke, but Simon just stared into space with a look of deep concentration. After a moment's thought, Alex was relieved that Simon didn't catch on to his jest because he didn't want to distract him. He pushed on ahead and asked, So, after last night's dream, did you hear or see anything weird when you woke up? Simon shook his head distractedly. No, he replied, I felt okay. Kind of sad that the dream stopped, but normal. No noises or flying fish or anything. Well, that kind of blows away the whole telepathic hallucination thing, Alex told him, because I heard something and I saw something really weird. It took Simon a moment to pick up on Alex's words, but when he did, his eyes widened and he all but gasped. You did? He asked a bit loudly. What was it? Simon's question drew looks from several other students, and Alex realized that homeroom was getting a bit too crowded to discuss such things. I don't really want to talk about it here, he said. Maybe I can tell you a little bit about it before first period in the hallway or something. Simon seemed frustrated, but he too looked around the room and said, All right, yeah, but don't forget. After a few seconds, he seemed to change his mind and asked, Can you at least tell me something about it? Alex realized he was probably being unkind simply to say that he had seen something and then to avoid the subject, so he said, Well, it wasn't outside anyway. He saw Simon look alarmed, so he quickly added, But it wasn't scary or anything. It wasn't an animal or whatever. It was just weird. Simon, looking slightly reassured, but still quite puzzled, asked, Weird how? I'll tell you about it in a minute, Alex replied. Then, as a thought occurred to him, he added, Heck, I might even be able to show it to you this afternoon. Now Simon looked even more puzzled, as well as more intrigued. But at that very second, Mr. Anderson stepped into the room and made his ritual call for the students to be around and quiet, so Alex could say no more.